small town of Whitford was quiet, its streets empty and still. The only sounds that could be heard were the occasional rustle of wind through the trees and the distant hum of a refrigerator running in some unseen house. At this hour, most people were asleep, tucked away in their beds, oblivious to the oddities that could unfold in the dark hours of the night. And yet, as 14-year-old Tom Matthews walked home from his friend's house, the silence of the night felt wrong. It wasn't just the usual quiet. It was unnervingly silent. Even the crickets had stopped their chirping. His footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as they clicked on the pavement, each one bouncing off the empty houses on either side of the street. He quickened his pace, feeling the cold night air pressing in around him, the hairs on the back of his neck rising for no apparent reason. Tom lived on the edge of the town, where the woods began to creep in from all directions. To his left, across the street, stood the old playground, an odd place to see at this hour. Usually, by now, it would have been empty for hours, if not days. But tonight it seemed different. Tom slowed as he glanced across the street, his gaze drawn to the swings that creaked lightly in the wind, the slides looming like ghostly figures in the dark. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He could see them, figures moving on the swings. There were children. At least, they looked like children. The moonlight illuminated their pale forms, casting long shadows behind them. They were playing as though it was the middle of the day, their small forms moving rhythmically, in sync with the swings, back and forth, back and forth. There were no sounds of laughter, no playful shouts. The only noise was the faint squeak of the metal chains as they shifted with the movement. But Tom could tell something was wrong, something didn't sit right. The swings moved too smoothly, too perfectly, as if they were being pulled by invisible hands. Tom's pulse quickened as he stood there, staring. He wanted to turn around and run home, but his legs felt frozen in place. His mind told him to go, to forget about what he was seeing, and just get to safety. But his curiosity tugged at him. What were these children doing here, playing so late? They were so still, so quiet. It wasn't normal. His gaze narrowed, trying to discern their features. But the moonlight was weak. The children's faces seemed too pale, too blank. They didn't look quite right. There was no joy, no expression, just an eerie stillness. One of the children on the swing turned their head toward him. Tom's heart skipped a beat. The face was gaunt, too hollow, as though the skin was stretched too tightly over their bones. The eyes were wide open, but they didn't glisten with the usual life of a child's. Instead, they were dark and empty, like black holes sucking in the light. He stood frozen, unable to look away. Then, almost as if they had been waiting for him to notice, the children on the swings stopped. They all turned their heads in unison, staring directly at him with those same dark, lifeless eyes. Tom felt his breath catch in his chest. He was no longer sure if they were children at all. They were more like twisted versions of children, something that didn't belong in the real world. "Come join us," one of them whispered, its voice barely audible in the still night air. Tom's heart pounded in his chest, and his legs trembled. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But something deep inside him told him to stay. That whisper had come from one of the children, and the way they spoke was strange, cold, and mechanical, as if they had rehearsed the words 1,000 times. "Come play," another one called out, their voice slightly more melodic but still wrong. unnerving. They didn't move, not yet. Their eyes stayed locked on him, and Tom felt the weight of their stare pressing into him, as though they were pulling at his very soul. The air around him felt thick, suffocating, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse right where he stood. He had to get out of here, but something rooted him in place. He was trapped. The child on the swing closest to him leaned forward slightly, their thin, pale fingers curling around the chains as if to beckon him closer. The skin on their hand looked stretched, thin and translucent in the dim light. Tom couldn't take it any longer. He turned and ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps as his heart thudded painfully against his chest. He didn't dare look back. He just ran, faster than he had ever run in his life, desperate to get away from whatever he had seen, whatever was out there in the dark. The streetlights seemed to blur as he passed under them, his feet pounding against the ground. His home wasn't far, just a few blocks away. He turned the corner onto his street, barely able to catch his breath. His body was on autopilot, the familiar path home providing some sense of security in the face of the horror he had just witnessed. But even as he approached the familiar side of his house, the unsettling feeling didn't leave him. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. When Tom reached his front yard, he paused. His home was dark, the windows pitch black, as expected for this time of night. But as he approached the porch steps, he felt his stomach churn. There, standing in the living room window, was a figure. It was him. Tom's heart nearly stopped. He froze, staring at the figure inside his own house, his breath coming in shallow, terrified gasps. The figure in the window looked exactly like him. Same clothes, same messy hair, same posture. But the eyes were wide open, staring directly out of the window at him. They were hollow, empty, just like the eyes of the children on the swings. Tom's pulse raced as he backed away slowly, too afraid to move forward. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure, the twisted, distorted version of himself, watching from the window with those same cold, empty eyes. His hand reached for the door handle, but it was already open. The door creaked slightly as if it had been waiting for him to enter. Slowly, hesitantly, he stepped inside, the door swinging open behind him with a soft, eerie sound. He turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was the figure again. It was him, but not him. And then the door slammed shut with a deafening thud, and he understood. It had been too late from the moment he had seen those children on the swings. There was no escape, no way back. The air was thick with unease as Tom stood frozen, his breath shallow, staring at the children on the swings. He tried to tell himself it was just his mind playing tricks on him, that the late hour and the quietness of the night had warped his perception. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The swings moved again, gently rocking back and forth. No wind, no breeze, just the eerie creak of chains. Tom's eyes darted from one child to the next. There were 5 of them. He hadn't noticed that before. They seemed so still, so lifeless, and yet the movements were too fluid, too mechanical. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The children wore ragged clothes, like old hand-me-downs that had been worn for far too long. Their faces, if you could call them faces, were pale, nearly ghostly white, with sharp angles that gave them a distorted, unsettling look. They seemed to be staring at nothing in particular, their eyes unblinking, devoid of any light. It was as though they were empty. their faces frozen in perpetual stillness. Tom's heart began to race, and a cold sweat began to bead on his forehead. He felt the familiar sensation of fear creeping up on him, creeping up his spine like fingers trying to grasp him. He wanted to look away, to run, but his feet felt glued to the spot. His legs wouldn't move. The quiet was suffocating. A sudden movement broke the tension, and one of the children on the swing shifted, turning its head slightly toward him. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The face, it was too pale, too thin. There was something unnatural about it, like a mask stretched over the bones. The eyes were black, pools of darkness that sucked the light around them, making it hard to focus. They were wide, unblinking, and fixed directly on him. He swallowed hard, trying to convince himself it was all in his mind. He was tired. He was just tired. It had been a long day, and he was seeing things. But the longer he stared, the more real they seemed, the more the hairs on his neck stood up. "Come play," one of the children whispered. The voice was thin, almost like the wind, but it cut through the air like a sharp blade. Tom's stomach twisted into a knot. He didn't know why, but he felt the urge to answer, to say something, to do something. He wanted to run, but the words of that whisper clung to him, making his feet feel heavy, making his body feel like it was caught in a thick, invisible web. Another child turned its head toward him, its smile wide but disturbingly out of place. It wasn't a smile of joy or warmth. It was empty, cruel, like a grin painted on a doll's face. "Come play," the second child repeated, its voice soft but urgent, as if it had said the words countless times, and now was waiting for him to respond. The words echoed in his mind, reverberating in the pit of his stomach. Tom felt dizzy, like the world around him was shifting, warping into something alien, something he didn't understand. The cold air around him seemed to grow colder, wrapping itself around his limbs, making his fingers tingle and his breath come out in frosty puffs. But still, he stood there, unable to move, unable to pull his gaze away. He watched as one of the children stopped swinging and hopped off, its feet landing with a soft thud on the ground. It moved toward him with unnatural fluidity, its head tilted slightly to the side, as if it were studying him. There was something deeply unsettling about the way it moved. Its steps were too perfect, too calculated. It didn't walk like a child, stumbling over its own feet. No, this was different. It was controlled, deliberate, as though it was some sort of puppet, its movements dictated by an unseen hand. Tom's throat was dry, and his mouth felt parched. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He tried again, but still, nothing. It was like the air around him had thickened, suffocated any sound he might try to make. He tried to step back, but his feet felt stuck, as if they were sinking into the ground. The child, the one who had stepped off the swing, came closer, its face as blank as the others. But now, as it neared, Tom could see the details more clearly. Its skin was tight, stretched thin over the bones, giving it a hollowed, skeletal appearance. The eyes were too dark, the pupils too wide. Its lips were cracked as though it hadn't smiled in years, and yet it grinned at him, a grin that made his skin crawl. "Come play," it repeated, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a command, soft but insistent. Tom took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. His feet still wouldn't move. They felt like lead. The closer the child got, the more intense the darkness around him seemed to grow. The shadows seemed to stretch, pulling at him, tugging at his mind. He wanted to scream, to shout, but his body refused to obey. His pulse throbbed in his temples, and the weight of the child's stare seemed to grow heavier and heavier. Without warning, the child reached out, its hand extending toward him. The fingers were unnaturally long, the nails jagged and yellow like claws. Tom's heart raced, his entire body screaming for him to run, but his legs refused to move. He tried to turn and run, to escape, but it was like his body was caught in a nightmare, stuck in place, unable to flee. His body screamed at him to move, but the fear, the terror, kept him paralyzed. He could feel the child's cold hand on his arm now, its fingers wrapping around him with a grip that felt too tight, too strong. "Join us," the child said, its voice now a low, eerie rasp, as if it was speaking through layers of distortion. "Come and play with us forever." The words sent a shiver down Tom's spine, and he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He wanted to pull away, to run, but the hand on his arm wouldn't let go. It felt like ice, like death itself was holding him in place. For a moment, Tom's vision blurred, the world around him swirling into darkness. His thoughts raced. He had to escape. He couldn't stay here. Not with these things. He had to get away. But every time he tried to move, his body refused, locked in place by something far more terrifying than fear itself. And then, as if the very air itself had conspired against him, something shifted. The children on the swings stopped. They all stopped moving at once, their faces still turned toward him, their eyes unblinking, their grins wider now, somehow more disturbing. The child holding him let go of his arm with a sudden, sharp jerk. Tom stumbled backward, the terror in his chest overwhelming. His legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The children stared at him, their eyes never leaving him, never blinking, like predators watching their prey. Tom felt the overwhelming urge to run, to get as far away as possible, but his legs felt like jelly. His body wouldn't cooperate. He had to get out. He had to escape. But no matter how much he tried, no matter how much he willed himself to move, he was stuck, frozen in place. The children began to approach, their footsteps slow, deliberate, each step measured. Tom watched as they surrounded him, their faces blank, their eyes empty. They were getting closer, closing in on him, their movements too fluid, too perfect. He tried to scream, to call for help, but no sound escaped his throat. It was as though the very air around him had stolen his voice, stolen his will to fight. The terror, the dread, it was suffocating. Then, just as they were about to reach him, the world around him shifted once again. It was as if time itself had warped, bending reality into something that didn't make sense. Tom blinked, and suddenly, he was back at the edge of the playground, standing on the sidewalk, staring across at the swings. His heart was still pounding, his body drenched in cold sweat. The children were gone. The playground was empty, but something felt different. The air was wrong. The darkness seemed to linger longer, pressing in on him. He turned around, feeling a rush of dread. The street behind him was silent, still, too still. It was then that he heard it, the faint sound of laughter. Not from the playground. No, it came from somewhere closer, from his house. He turned, and as he did, a chill ran down his spine. Standing in the window of his own house, staring out at him, was a face. His face. Tom's heart pounded violently in his chest as he stared at the figure in the window. His breath came in short, shallow gasps, his limbs trembling with an unexplainable fear. He couldn't move, couldn't think. couldn't tear his eyes away from the sight. There, in the dark window of his own house, stood the perfect replica of himself. The figure stood still, staring out at him, its eyes wide and black, its face twisted in an eerie, unnatural stillness. It was him, his body, his clothes, his messy hair. But it wasn't him. No, it couldn't be. The eyes were dark, voids of emptiness, consuming all the light around them. Tom's throat tightened. He wanted to scream, but the sound was lodged somewhere deep inside him, trapped beneath the paralyzing fear that had gripped his body. His feet felt like lead, glued to the ground, unable to move. The world around him seemed to narrow, the air thick with something oppressive, something dark and malevolent. His mind raced, searching for some explanation, some way to make sense of what was happening. But no answer came. His legs finally gave way, and he sank to his knees, gasping for air. The pavement beneath him felt cold, too cold, like the very ground was trying to pull him down into it. The figure in the window didn't move. It didn't blink, didn't twitch. It just stood there, its eyes locked on him, staring with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Then, the figure smiled. It wasn't a smile of warmth or joy. No, it was something far worse, something that sent a sharp wave of dread crashing through him. The smile stretched too wide, too unnaturally, its lips curling back to reveal jagged, crooked teeth. It was like a mask, a hollow mockery of a smile that seemed to mock him, mock his very existence. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He scrambled to his feet, his body shaking uncontrollably. He turned to run, to get away, but the world around him seemed to shift, the ground beneath his feet trembling as though it were alive. His vision blurred, the world spinning, and he stumbled backward, desperately trying to regain his balance. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong, that the world was slipping through his fingers like sand in the wind. The laughter came again. It was faint, distant, echoing from the darkness behind him. But it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, hundreds, a cacophony of voices, all laughing in unison, all laughing at him. The sound burrowed deep into his skull, gnawing at his sanity, making his head spin. It was the laughter of the children on the swings. No, not just the children. The laughter of something far older, something far darker, something that had been waiting for him. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. What was this? What was he seeing? It didn't make sense. The playground, the children, the figure in the window, all of it felt like a nightmare, a fever dream that he couldn't wake from. But it wasn't a dream. He could feel it, the coldness in the air, the weight of the darkness pressing in around him. It was real. And then, without warning, the world shifted once again. The ground beneath his feet cracked open, as though the earth itself was splitting apart. A dark void, a black pit appeared in front of him, swallowing the light, pulling everything into its depths. He could hear the sounds of distant whispers, voices that were too far away, too distorted to understand. But the whispers were getting closer, closer. Tom stumbled backward, his feet dragging along the pavement. But there was nowhere to go. The pit was all around him, encroaching on every side. His body felt like it was being pulled toward it, toward the blackness, toward the infinite abyss that yawned in front of him. His body screamed in terror, but his mind couldn't comprehend what was happening. He was falling into the darkness. The last thing he saw before he was consumed by the void was the figure in the window. It was no longer standing still. It was moving, slowly, deliberately. It raised its hand to the glass, its fingers stretching, curling, like claws. And then it smiled again. The darkness closed in around him, swallowing him whole. When Tom opened his eyes, everything was different. He was no longer standing on the sidewalk, staring at his house. No, he was in a place that felt wrong. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the sky above him was a deep, blood-red color, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. He was no longer in his town, no longer surrounded by familiar streets and houses. Instead, he was in a desolate, barren place, an endless stretch of cracked, dry earth that seemed to go on forever. He blinked, trying to make sense of his surroundings. But the more he looked, the more he felt a deep, gnawing sense of unease settle in his chest. The ground beneath him was cracked and dry, the earth devoid of life. There were no trees, no grass, no animals, only an oppressive, suffocating silence. The air felt heavy, as though it were pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. And then he heard the laughter again. It was faint at first, like a distant echo, but it was growing louder, closer, until it was all around him. It was the laughter of children, but not the children from his town. No, this was different. This was darker. The laughter seemed to echo from all directions, from every corner of this strange, desolate place. It was the laughter of something that had been waiting for him to arrive. Tom's heart raced in his chest, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. He spun around trying to find the source of the sound, but there was nothing. Only the endless stretch of dry, cracked earth. "Come play," the voice whispered. It was soft, almost sweet, but there was something deeply wrong about it, something that made his stomach churn. Tom wanted to run. He wanted to get away, to escape from whatever nightmare this was. But his feet wouldn't move. It was like his body was frozen, locked in place. He could feel the darkness creeping in, pressing in from all sides, suffocating him, swallowing him whole. And then he saw them, the children. They appeared out of nowhere, emerging from the shadows, their pale faces twisted in grotesque smiles. There were 5 of them, just like before, but they were different now. Their bodies were no longer human. They were something else, something twisted, something inhuman. Their limbs were too long, their fingers too thin, their eyes too wide, too dark. They stared at him, their empty eyes boring into his soul, and their smiles, oh, their smiles, were the same grotesque masks of twisted, malevolent joy. "Come play," they said, their voices a chorus, a haunting melody that made Tom's blood run cold. And then they moved toward him. Their movements were slow, deliberate, like they were savoring every step they took. They didn't run. They didn't need to. Their very presence was enough to make him feel like he was being dragged toward them, like he was being pulled into their world, into their nightmare. Tom tried to move, tried to escape, but his body wouldn't obey. He was trapped, frozen, unable to escape the pull of the children, the pull of whatever darkness had brought him here. And as they surrounded him, their pale hands reaching out to touch him, he realized, too late, that there was no escape. He was theirs now, forever. The darkness closed in around him, swallowing him whole. And in the distance, the laughter echoed on, forever and ever.